Morning. In light of what's been happening in the world, as you all know, it's a very hard topic because for somebody who looks like me, our every day is very difficult and you have to think about everything before you do it. And sometimes we just want people to understand just the process and the fear that we have within us. You know, a friend of mine was sitting with other Christians the other day, and they were discussing what's happening in the US and in the world. And she said, somebody in the group said, it's really sad that this is happening to our brothers and sisters. And one woman denied it and said, no, I don't think it's happening. But even if it's happening, the Africans are not educated. They're not intelligent enough. This is a woman who's a Christian in Newcastle. I'm not talking about America. My first and second racism has happened in the church. And the first time, it was when I was in Kenya, a majority black country. And I showed up in church, and there was only one chair left with a European mother, a 9-year-old child, and an empty chair. And I was ushered in that chair. And this woman thought it's a good idea to pull her child away from me. And this child looks at the mother strangely, gets off the chair, pushes it to my side, sits down, and stares at me. It was very funny because it was a very curious little boy. And the mom picked up the child and sat him on her lap. She preferred the child to sit on her lap than sit next to me. This is a majority black church with very few Europeans in my own country, and that was happening in the church. I remember the shock of that because I'm thinking, for you who lives in a majority black country, what makes you think you're more important than the other people? And for you who worships God and says you love God, why would you do something like that? I cannot remember what was preached on that day because I felt so humiliated to be sitting in the presence of God and to be treated less than a human being. But the second time was in Sydney, in a church where Matt and I went. Nobody ever sat anywhere next to us. And I remember one time we went there late and people had put Bibles. You know how you can go into the church and you put your Bibles where you're going to sit. And I kid you not, Matt and I went and sat in, and so Matt sat on the edge, and I sat on the inside of this bench. And those Bibles disappeared so fast, and nobody came to that chair to pick it up. They were picking them from behind us when they thought we were not looking, and they'd be taking them off, and they went and sat somewhere else. So we always had a whole bench to ourselves. And what was interesting about this church, it was Europeans and Asians, but nobody would sit next to me because I was black. And I thought to myself, what kind of world have I brought myself to? We cannot sit here and deny that this is happening. You know, I was sharing with Matt yesterday that I had never realized how much fear I have to get out of the house in the morning. Because when I walk with Matt, I'm treated very differently than when I'm by myself. That's my reality. And I know that most of you will never understand that. But what pains me the most is the church, even from history, has been known to, lead the way in treating us as less than human beings. They've had to say that Aborigines and I are not only so low in the hierarchy of human beings to justify all the stuff that they've done to us. And I've always asked, and some of you have seen my Facebook posts when I'm asking, what did we do to the world that this has become a disease? I mean, we always say that God cursed Ham. But if God cursed Ham, that means blacks and Chinese and Indians, who are all children of Ham, should all be treated the same. But that's not what happens. First of all, God did not curse Ham. God cursed Canaan. And that's why we see the Israelites fighting with the Canaanites on their way to the promised land. But we've had to bear this burden all our lives when God clearly says, be hospitable to the sojourner, be hospitable to the foreigner, love them as you love yourself. That's what God expects of us. My question is this: why are we avoiding to talk about it in church, and we're pretending it's not happening? While in church, actually the biggest other racism that I've ever received, it was from somebody who's a born-again Christian who served in church. You know, it is so disgusting and so painful to be waking up every morning to watch what other people who look like you are going through. But this is the world that we have to live in. That because we look so different from everybody else, everybody points a finger, because it's so easy to put aside the people who look less or do not look like you. But I kid you not, the feeling that we have, not only I, but the Aborigines and every other dark-skinned person in this world, is so painful to see your own people being slaughtered like rats, because there's this inherent or imagined superiority that the rest of the world has against us. And I really wish that you who are hearing me and are listening to this, educate yourself, know the truth. We are not less than. You know, the friend had to say, excuse me, I have an African friend who has 2 degrees. How many do you have? And this person who said, oh, we are not intelligent, that's why we deserve to be treated that way, was very surprised. It's like, oh, they go to school? I'm like, seriously? That's where the world is at the moment? We really need to live our Christian life in the way God expects us to. So if you see anybody who looks like me going through a tough time, I'm just asking you that you stand up for them. Because it is so hard to live with so much pain and fear that I cannot just leave my house like you every morning and go anywhere, not even to the shop. It takes so much courage for me to go somewhere new by myself, and Matt knows it, so we have to go together. The number of times Matt has to stand up if he sees somebody coming to talk to me, he goes, I know it's because you're black, you might be treated differently, so I have to come stand there next to you so they don't treat you that way. What preconceived notions do you have about these people? What preconceived notions do you have about Aborigines? We need to educate ourselves and get out of our own biases of who we are and who we think God has made us to be. So please, I ask you, whether it's Chinese, whether it's African, whether it's Indian, darker skin is not a disease. You know, we are all shades of brown. Just because I am a darker brown does not make me less human. So people, please, church, I tell you what, the history I've read about racism, most of it is from churches. And that's what breaks my heart, because we've used the Bible to justify treating other people differently. And that's not right. So I hope you will welcome the stranger, whether they look like you or they don't, and you will treat other people equally like you want to be treated. To give me a chance to be able to leave my house confidently and not have to think about it, or not have to think about how my children will be treated when they go out in the world, because it's such a heavy burden. God bless.